Welcome to the Vibe of Muscle Shoals Sound podcast. This podcast is brought to you by Florence Lauderdale Tourism. Come see what the Shoals has to offer. Visit their website at florenceal.com. Edward Craig Hinton was born June 15, 1944 in Jacksonville, Florida. In 1967, Eddie arrived in Muscle Shoals with a promise to be the next genius. He was the grandson of a preacher, and he had the voice of his hero, Otis Redding. When Eddie was a small child, he moved from Jacksonville, Florida to Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and his musical interest was first piqued by Ricky Nelson. He loved Hello Mary Lou, Traveling Man, and Lonesome Town. As his musical interest grew, he discovered Ray Charles, Bobby Blue Bland, and eventually Otis Redding and Bobby Womack. Eddie was well-rounded and was even on the basketball team in high school. He enrolled at the University of Alabama, but Eddie had a dream to be a musician, so he dropped out of school and joined a local Tuscaloosa band, the 5 Minutes. And in that band, he first met Johnny Sandlin, later to be in the Hourglass with Greg and Dwayne Allman, as well as a renowned producer, particularly of the Allman Brothers Band. In 1967, Eddie left the 5 Minutes and moved to Muscle Shoals and teamed up with Marlon Green for songwriting, and he began playing on a few records released on the Quinvy label. He was simply put a musician's musician. The late drummer Jerry Corrigan said Eddie could play anything. Instead of telling you what rhythm he wanted you to play, he could sit down at the drums and show you. Jerry Wexler of Atlantic Records called Eddie the White Otis Redding. British critic Barney Hoskins called Eddie simply the blackest white voice ever committed to vinyl. Eddie's voice was what always drew you in, but his songwriting and playing made him in demand. In the fall of 1968, Eddie and Donnie Fritz were trying to come up with a song for the upcoming Dusty Springfield album, Dusty in Memphis, to be produced by Jerry Wexler. The song they wrote was Breakfast in Bed. It was actually the B-side of the single, and the flip of the record had radio playing Breakfast in Bed rather than the intended Don't Forget About Me. This was not the first hit song written by Eddie and many collaborators. He wrote or co-wrote classic songs recorded by Percy Sledge, Cover Me, the Box Tops' Choo Choo Train, which was recently heard in the Quentin Tarantino's new film Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and Bobby Womack's hit A Little Bit Salty, and later on, Where's Eddie, performed by Lulu on the New Roots LP recorded here at Muscle Shoals Sound. We've spoken about Eddie's voice and his songwriting, but the hidden treasure of his talent was his playing, a subtle, sparse style, and it would fit whatever song he was playing on. The great Dan Penn described Eddie's playing by saying he was without peer. The great musician, producer, and stylist from Memphis, Jim Dickinson, brought Eddie to Memphis to work on Toots Hibbert's solo record. Toots, of course, was in the reggae group Toots and the Maytals. And he said that he broke into tears watching Eddie play on Freedom Train. Dickinson said the business broke his heart. You can hear it in his records. But inside this destroyed human being was a spirit who could still play and sing. Eddie had struggled with mental health issues for years, and in the early 70s, Eddie began losing Eddie. Dwayne Allman had asked him to join the Allman Brothers Band, but Eddie declined. He decided to put all of his energy in producing a pop record on a singer named Jim Coleman. More of a Beatles pop record than a Southern soul record. The record was presented to several labels, including Jerry Wexler at Atlantic, who refused to put it out as well. And in 1972, Eddie shelved the record. The outcome crushed him. Jimmy Johnson of the Swampers said that he was never the same. And in 1995, when Eddie passed away at his mother's home in Birmingham, the only thing found in his room concerning his musical past was the master tapes of the Coleman-Hinton project under his bed. Eddie went off the grid for several years. He supposedly lived in Tennessee, eventually moving to Macon, Georgia, the home of Capricorn Records, where he worked for a while as a janitor at the studio. It was during this time that Jerry Wexler suggested to Capricorn Records president Phil Walden that he sign Eddie to a solo contract, and the result is a lost classic of Southern soul, very extremely dangerous. The record was recorded here at Muscle Shoals Sound with Swamper Barry Beckett producing. The record did well upon initial release. It sold around 20,000 copies, and then Capricorn went bankrupt. Black radio in Los Angeles, Detroit, and Philadelphia played songs off the record that created a buzz until Capricorn folded. The promise and subsequent lack of sales and promotion hit Eddie hard, and his mental health began to decline even further. He became even more unpredictable, and by the early 80s, he was living with his mother in Birmingham again. Eventually, she threw him out of her house. And in an attempt to get from Birmingham to Nashville, he ran out of money in Decatur, Alabama, and was homeless for a while. His old friend from college, John D. Weicker, rescued him from the streets, and eventually, with the help of Dick Cooper, helped Eddie record his second solo record, Letters from Mississippi, which led him to be signed by Bullseye Records, a label that was a part of the Rounder Records group. Very Extremely Dangerous continued to grow as a cult record, and it was a staple on the tour buses of the Rolling Stones and Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band. Finally, in 1997, it was re-released on CD, along with 1999's Hard Luck Guy, which included unissued material from Very Extremely Dangerous and tunes that Eddie was working on prior to his death. Hard Luck Guy is autobiographical, and each lyric tells the story of Eddie Hinton. In the early 2000s, Zane Records, an English label, put out Dear Y'all, the Songwriter Session, which was a collection of demos Eddie had put together when he was pitching songs. Later on, 2 more volumes of the Songwriter Sessions were released. Eddie struggled most of his adult life with addictions and mental health issues, and due to those issues, Eddie became a what if in the music world. But the people that Eddie worked with still tolerated his behavior most of the time. Stories abound of his borrowing money from his friends and then walking 50 miles to pay them back. He was a hard luck guy. I've talked about Edward Craig Hinton in this podcast, warts and all, but the bottom line is he was an incredibly talented musician. He could have been a household name. Some things are just not meant to be. Eddie passed away in 1995. He was 51. He remains unique, wrote Jerry Wexler, a white boy who truly sang and played in the spirit of the great black soul artist he venerated. With Eddie, it wasn't imitation. It was totally created with a fire and fury as real as Otis Redding or Wilson Pickett. There are still a few of Eddie's records out there on CD, including Very Extremely Dangerous and Dear Y'all Volume 1 of the Songwriter Sessions, as well as Cover Me, a compilation of Eddie's songs recorded by various artists. As Muscle Shoals music historian Dick Cooper said, Eddie Hinton was a jewel. Eddie Hinton was a hard luck guy. Join us next time from the historic Muscle Shoals Sound Studio located at 3614 Jackson Highway in Sheffield, Alabama for the vibe of Muscle Shoals sound. Come visit the studio. We're open Monday through Saturday from 10 until 4 with tours of the studio beginning at 10:30 and occurring every hour on the half hour. And listen to the Vibe of Muscle Shoals Sound podcast on whatever platform you prefer for your podcast. The Vibe of Muscle Shoals Sound is brought to you by Florence Lauderdale Tourism. Come see what the Shoals has to offer. Visit their website at visitflorenceal.com.